What's the scariest game you've ever played? Or more specifically, what did it look like? Horror games have spent decades chasing realism. Bigger budgets, better engines, more blood! But here's the problem. It doesn't work anymore. In recent years, some of the games that have terrified the internet the most are deceptively simple looking. By examining the mechanics of these games, I'm going to break down what makes indie horror so terrifying, and how these developers are revolutionizing the genre by deliberately limiting their graphics. ITSYAKOI here, and welcome to the pod, because we're diving deep. In order to fully understand where graphics are important, you have to look at their best applications. By far the best examples of recent memory are from the Resident Evil games. Whether it's the monster baby of 8, distorted monstrosities Requiem, it's safe to say that Capcom has mastered the art of disturbing enemy design. I also find that the power of the RE engine heavily benefits these games. Since it's so photorealistic, it helps ease our minds into the world as almost being real. So by the time things get extreme, it serves as a complete system shock as your mind fails to compute what it's seeing. Not only that, but because it's so detailed, it makes everything so much more visceral. Seeing skin burn or veiny organs and folds not only makes you sick, it takes standard video game gore and sharpens it into something so raw that it sticks with you long after you look away. We can also see this idea applied to games like Outlast, Amnesia, and Alien Isolation. In Outlast, for example, the themes presented are already very disturbing, and so the enemies perfectly reflect them. In the first game, that's mental patients, and the second, crazy religious fanatics. However, what makes them so effective is seeing the detail in each enemy. Seeing the open, jagged scars carved into their flesh communicates the brutality of these people, as they're willing to even mutilate their own. Or, Chris Walker for another example. Chained hands, black veins, blood-soaked body, and a dominating stature tell the story of a man who's been corrupted beyond human limits. So naturally, your initial reaction is complete revulsion, but due to these details, your mind starts to wander, asking questions you probably don't want the answer to. It traps you in an uncanny dread where you're not just running away from a boss, it's a reflection of the perversions of humanity. Also, it's just gross. Moving along, in both Alien Isolation and Amnesia the Bunker, the sheer detail on the creatures makes them feel deeply unsettling. They're rendered with just enough anatomical precision to feel like they could actually exist in the real world. And seeing the saliva drip from the xenomorph's mouth shows it does not give a shit about table manners. Can you not chew with your mouth open? And will do everything in its power to kill you. Speaking of killing you, the graphics of each of these games help elevate the body horror. Seeing Isaac be ripped apart, or the brutal zombie attacks, decaying flesh and intestines is made so much worse by the fact that it looks like that. In most video games, there's a disconnect between yourself and the characters, but especially in first-person games that look this good, the illusion just becomes greater and greater, as if you're watching actual gore footage that you know you shouldn't, but just can't help looking at. And to further support my point, look at the recent Silent Hill 2 remake. Seeing characters like Pyramid Head with a new coat of paint makes them look even more intimidating. Moving away from his more crude design in the original into a full-fledged nightmare that truly cements him as an icon. However, it can be argued that some of the horror from these games was done better during their earlier versions. Like the OG Pyramid Head was so intimidating because he was basic. The rustic textures in contrast between his bloodied butcher's apron with his pristine white hands made him look like a phantom, contributing to the ethereal nature of the setting, as opposed to some dude on trend. Same with the Nemesis in Resident Evil. It's a fair argument to say that his original design was better, with gross stitchings across his face and fleshy tubes protruding from his body that expose just how horrific the experiments were to create him, as opposed to a dude with eczema. High fidelity graphics are incredibly effective at shocking players in the moment. But what happens when a game doesn't rely on hyper-realism to make the horror last? To understand that, we have to look at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Before you get your pitchforks out, I'm not saying that any of these games look bad, just that they use their stylization, which is much more limited in comparison, as a deliberate tool to scare the player. In most games like this, the horror comes from the setting as opposed to grandiose displays meant to shock you, and to start, I want to look at two examples, Fears to Fathom and Mouthwashing. Both games use a deliberate retro, low-poly aesthetic that plays on the memories of older players who grew up playing games in this style. For them, it taps into and perverts the sense of nostalgia associated with their youth. But for younger players, It acts as almost a window into a distant era of gaming, one that we haven't experienced. Sure, the visuals feel familiar, yet strangely alien, like uncovering footage from a forgotten world that should still exist, but doesn't. These games use horror that's more grounded in implication. Even when there's instances of brutality, like the bloody remains of Curly, the art direction only elevates the key details you need to know about. You don't need to see the burned skin on his body to understand how horrifying he looks. The crooked teeth, malformed flesh, and piercing eye does so much in evoking fear in the player. He stands out and contrasts everything around him, which makes him so much more alarming. And in Fears to Fathom, stretching human faces on the models makes them appear super unnatural, almost as if they're wearing a suit just to trick you. These are people, but it's almost as if they're no longer human. Which is a huge transition into what I think these type of graphics do best. It helps distort the normal just to the point of eeriness. In this game, people are all drawn with skewed characteristics, stretching them to odd proportions, while their unnatural expressions and features make you question who's human and who's not. Games with lower tier graphics usually focus on more shocking moments. This is different from the higher tier games I mentioned before, where the emphasis is much more on disturbing you. When you look at games like Omori, Doki Doki, or even Squirrel Stapler, they're all concise games that excel in the switcheroo. Also, as a side note, I feel like all these games use color and juxtaposition to create fear. Like 1 minute you're exploring the woods in a retro aesthetic with Jacksepticeye, the next, you're initially presented with something either cute, wholesome, or even silly. But when you have a glimpse at the reality of what's happening, you can't unsee it. This technique of slowly showing your hand to the player helps create a lasting fear throughout the experience about what might happen next. Like the infamous Sayori cutscene.
Wait.
It's effective because at that point, you had been led astray to the true nature of the game with only hints as to what was going on. After you pass that threshold, you can't trust the game anymore. Where any AAA game might focus on the arrival of God, David Szymanski couldn't care less about it, because he saved it for the only jump scare at the end of the game.
Oh my god!
And since it's only on screen for like 2 seconds, you're so much more afraid of it because you can't see it long enough to rationalize what it actually is. And I want to contrast this with the Leviathans from Subnautica, for example. Yes, they're terrifying, don't get me wrong. You know what? Never mind. But after enough time, you become more aware of them. The high fidelity reveals much more about these creatures, whereas the low poly graphics makes your mind fill in the details, which just happens to be another benefit of this design. And that's why it can be so effective. Key emphasis on can, because yeah, there are still pitfalls with low graphic games. I find that personally, it fails to evoke as strong of an emotion in the player. Like sure, they can be scary, but it can just as easily skew into goofy looking territory. It makes it a lot harder to make effective scares, as opposed to the exaggerated displays of the higher quality graphic games. I think if we can look at how these games use their graphics to scare the player, we can get a better understanding of how effective it is. But to do that, I need to talk about Bloodborne. When you look at games like Little Nightmares, Dead Space, Metro Exodus, or even Escape the Backrooms, by having better graphics, it makes the enemies in horror feel so much more real. In Bloodborne, seeing the disgusting creatures hunting you down is made so much more effective because you see the protruding limbs, contorted features, and fleshy bodies, which evokes just such a primal fear within you. It's almost harder to not be affected by this type of game because it's tricking our brains into acting as if it was a real life threat. And this just straight up would not work as effectively with low poly aesthetics. So when we look at the Bloodborne remake, while it is still the same game, I find that it's much less visceral and fails to capture the same cosmic horror feelings and overwhelming sense of decay that the original does. Seeing blood gush out of a pig's ass and eyes poking out of walls scares me so much more because it looks like my room. However, due to things like the small draw distance and blocky design, it makes you question what's around every corner. Like, is that another enemy or just a shadow? And we can see how the mentality of messing with the player is done much more effectively in games like Who's Lila, Look Outside, and Faith the Unholy Trinity, because of the way they use their graphics to leave room for player imagination. Being forced to fill in the gaps that the visuals leave behind is terrifying, because your own mind ends up creating scenes far worse than anything a developer could put to screen, especially when it's paired with the actual imagery that you are given. So it's clear that both excel at their own fields. But if you forget all of that, can you even have horror when you can't even see? That's right, I'm talking horror where you can't even see anything. And to do that, I'm using two games, Iron Lung and Proximate. In Iron Lung, No, not that one. That's better. In Iron Lung, you're confined to the submarine for the whole experience, being forced to take these low quality photos. Yet, since the environment was modeled using Unity, the details in the photos appear much higher quality. This allows you to create a mental image of your surroundings. So when you see this, your mind goes a mile a minute as you try to even think of what this thing could be. But if we look at Proximate, you gotta navigate your environment by inputting directions and scanning what's ahead of you. This can be things like jam, a shower, or a woman? No, wait, why is there a human? This place is supposed to be abandoned. What is that? Yes, the word human was scary to me at one point in time because of this game. By stripping you of so many senses, the fear becomes tailored to you. Cause what is that? Is it a fleshy monster? A ghost? Or child support?
Child support is due down.
I don't know, that's up for you to decide. And that's the scariest thing of all. And that just shows a few ways that graphics can be used against you to scare you. That's not even getting into things like ARGs or meta-narrative games. But that's a rabbit hole for another day. To conclude, both high and low fidelity graphics are incredible tools for scaring a player. They both come with respective benefits and limitations, whether it be attacking your physical senses or forcing your imagination to turn against you. But no matter how many polygons you got, if the underlying game design isn't scary, a glossy coat of paint or a retro filter won't save it. Graphics can never create terror out of nothing. They can only serve as an extension of the developer's vision. But that's about all from me. So let me know in the comments, do you prefer more realistic looking horror games or more stylized ones? Anyways, thanks for stopping by the pond. ITSYAKOI here, and I'm out.